Will Mali return to civilian rule? Vote counting is underway in a constitutional referendum held by Mali's military junta. Low voter turnout, irregularities, and reports of kidnappings have marred the process, and opponents argue the new text would give too much power to the president. Still, some regional bodies and the UN say it's a good test of the military's commitment to democratic transition. I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is Mali. Voting in a constitutional referendum was hugely significant for Malians who've often taken to the streets to have their voices heard. But the document itself and the vote counting process have been controversial. According to local reports, voter turnout was as low as 27%. Now, after seizing power in a 2021 coup and under pressure from the regional bloc ECOWAS, the junta promised to hold the vote as part of a transition to democracy. But some of the proposed clauses in the new constitution are contentious. Some complain it is too secular and doesn't respect the Islamic majority of the country. Others say it leaves the president's power unchecked. But transitional president Assimi Goïta says it's a necessary step toward building a stronger Mali.
I am convinced that this referendum will pave way for a new Mali, a Mali Kura, a strong Mali, an efficient Mali, a Mali at the service of the population's well-being. I would also like to appeal to all Malians, whatever the outcome of this referendum, to join hands and form a sacred union around Mali.
And while the vote is historic and could be seen as progress, the Malian Election Observation Mission describes a fairly grim picture.
At the end of the poll, there were several types of incidents and malfunctions in the circle of Niankoro at Tonde-Darusar. Electoral agents were kidnapped, beaten and tied up by unknown assailants before being admitted to a health referral center. Their motorcycles and phones were taken. In the commune of Kalasiguida, circle of Nyono, the presidents of the Godjila and Manial polling stations were abducted by armed men.
Malian authorities are expected to announce the results on Friday. The African Union has not issued a statement clarifying its position on the vote, but the UN mission stationed in Mali for some 10 years to support the peace process was ordered by the government on Friday to leave immediately for failure to accomplish its mission.
Unfortunately, MINUSMA seems to have become a part of the problem in fueling inter-community tensions, exacerbated by the allegations of extreme gravity, which are extremely harmful to peace, reconciliation, and to national cohesion. This situation is begetting mistrust among the Malian population, and also causing a crisis of confidence between Malian authorities and MINUSMA. In light of all of the above, the Malian government asks for the withdrawal without delay of MINUSMA. However, the government does stand ready to cooperate with the United Nations.
So is Mali at a crossroads, reclaiming its sovereignty with a new constitution while transitioning to democracy? Or is the military tightening its grip on power? Joining me now to debate that are from Welesebugu. Mali is the executive director of Empower Mali and also Malian politician and former diplomat Samake. From Conakry is Issaka Souare. He's a former special advisor to the African Union's High Representative for Mali and the Sahel. And in Washington is Andrew Lebovich, a fellow with the Clingendale Institute. Thanks all so much for being with us. Samake, as the Malian on the panel, tell us how you're feeling about this referendum. Is this constitution what Mali needs, and has the vote been fair?
Well, we almost have it now. So this is what we get. And I think this is the path to the next step. And I believe that we will hold on to this process. It was a test for the newly appointed agency for independent agency for the organizations of elections. Of course, it's not a perfect. It doesn't have everybody's agreement, but this is what we get for now. And I believe that we should take this and move to the next level.
Okay, I mean, you say it's not perfect, but can you confirm what we're hearing about kidnappings and other pretty severe irregularities?
I am not aware of any kidnapping uh, in reference to the elections. I don't know that anyone has been kidnapped by. Well, we've seen that maybe in the northern part of Mali, we've heard some in the center that people opposed to democracy have taken the polling stations, but I have not personally heard of any individual being kidnapped.
Okay, how do you feel, though, about voter turnout? I mean, we're hearing estimates as low as just 27%. Is that good enough?
No, it's not. 27% is quite low, maybe the lowest in the history of our country. However, given the circumstances, I will not just be nitty picking. I think that we should take what we have, push Mali towards a constitutional order. However imperfect it is, this is not going to change much. We have to nudge the current authorities to organize the next step, the presidential election, so that Mali return to a civilian and constitutional order. And that is really our main goal right now. So we can complain, and that's what I have invited other politicians. I said, the military administration, the transitional authorities, they want this referendum, and this is what they were able to produce. Okay. If we want to return to constitutional order, let us support this effort so that we makes it as good as it can get. And then we get to the presidential election. This is not the end of the country. So we will be able to fix what's not appropriate in the future.
Right. Let me ask Issaka then. I mean, is this progress, do you think, or could it set Mali back?
It's difficult to say it can set Mali back. What is clear is that having at least a constitutional reform has been something that have been called for in Mali to reflect the developments, particularly the 2015 peace accord. And we can also see that it takes forward many of the progressive elements of the 1992 Constitution. Also, it's one of the main tasks of the transitional roadmap, which is consigned in a timetable that was agreed with the regional bloc ECOWAS. In that regard, it would therefore be a way and a step forward to the finalization of the transitional period, but also a response to the calls over the years for a constitutional reforms. Details are a different thing, but that's what I can say with regard to whether this is something that can be considered as a step forward.
Okay. Andrew, what's your take? Do you think this is, even if it's imperfect, it is a move toward democracy, or is it all a farce and a way for the military to entrench its power?
Well, there's certainly a risk of that. I think on the one hand, this referendum at some point was necessary to bring an end to the transitional period. And so this is where I agree with my co-panelists that it is essential to have some sort of a process. And I don't think anyone believed that it was going to be a perfect process. There are a couple of risks, however, one of them being, as you pointed out, the risk of an entrenchment of military power and the fact that as we move toward presidential elections in Mali, there's a very real risk, of course, that either Assimi Goïta, the president of the transition, or someone close to the military junta that took power, or a member of the junta themselves will actually run for president. And then there's also the risk of the not just increasing presidential power that's outlined under this constitution, but the reduction of space for opposition that we've seen, particularly in terms of how the government has restricted access, has put enormous pressure on some opposition figures, particularly those who are advocating for a no vote in the run-up to the referendum. And so there are yes, on the one hand, this is a necessary step, even if imperfect, but there are a huge number of risks for political space, for civil society space, and for any eventual return to sort of normal political order in Mali.
Okay. Yeah, let me come
You know,
back to. Okay, go
I
ahead.
I wouldn't say that the risks that my co-panelists are mentioning are not associated with the referendum. Those risks exist before the referendum and will continue to exist. There are a lot of uncertainty that has been going on. I'm skeptical, of course, about a lot of things. We want this election. We want this transition to come to an end. We believe that the referendum is a good step, a good indication, and the procedure and the process itself also was an indication whether the election would be fair, the upcoming elections would be fair, and that the newly organized EDGE, which is the independent agency to organize elections, will be able to implement its mission. So we've seen that the gentleman who has been appointed, Mr. Cisse, who's the president of the so-called EDGE, was able to pull in. The referendum in itself has not much to do with the risks that my co-panelist has mentioned. Those risks existed and they will continue to exist until we get out of this transitional period. But however, the elections, the referendum itself was a good indication to us whether the remaining steps, including presidential elections, will be held. I thank the government, the transitional authorities for, and I congratulate them for the ability to organize this, because if we were.
Okay, we seem to be having problems with Ye's connection. We're going to try to reestablish that. We'll get right back to him. Issaka, let me turn back to you then, because the vote for the referendum and the Constitution itself, it has been translated, both the ballots and the Constitution itself, into basically every language in Mali. But tell us, how many average Malians really can understand it? Are they actually reading the text, or are they only getting these kind of main contentious points and taking a side on that? I mean, so many Malians seem frightened of the secularism that's suggested in this constitution, or the feeling that the president could be given too much power through this constitution specifically. So what does this mean? What does the text actually mean for the average Malian when they go to vote?
You're posing a couple of questions. Not being in Mali, I won't be able to tell whether people read it, but what I know from the time I spent in Mali from 2013 to 2016 is that the spoken word goes further than the written one. And you have a lot of radio stations that would be airing this in the different national languages that have now been elevated to the level of official language. And I think that's a good thing. French being official language, the majority, that's not only Mali, a majority of African countries, you would have less than 40% who master the language of the former colonial power. It doesn't mean that you scrap it, but I think accommodating national languages so that people can communicate in a language they can understand clearly. I think that's a good thing. So I would imagine that rather than reading it, that the radio stations would be airing this, and that's my experience in Mali, and that would allow people to understand. Whether they will couch it in a different language, that is different.
You know the African Union well, and the AU really hasn't taken a position on this vote. There hasn't been a statement made. Do you think they will and they should be taking a position now, or would that be seen as somehow intervening in an area where they have no right to?
No, I don't know what position they will take if the majority of Malians who voted approve of the constitution. They will not have anything to say in that regard, because regardless of the voter turnout, the percentage percentage of winning is the percentage of those who effectively vote. If they are 10% of the voting corps, that becomes the 100% of what you would be actually evaluating the score against. So if that is the case, African Union cannot do anything or say anything contrary to that. On the contrary, actually, they would, in my view, consider it as a step forward because it's one of the points on the transitional authorities' deliverables to move forward towards the restoration of constitutional order.
Okay. Yay, I am being told now your line has been reestablished, so I'd like to go back to you and ask, as far as the voters are concerned and what the average Malian actually thinks. We know that this vote was translated and the text was translated to Malian languages, but how much does the average voter have a real understanding of what's contained in this document?
No, well, I would say that there have been polling. We do understand that very few Malians have read the document. We have no doubt that the majority of the people voting and even supporting the referendum have not read or have a clear understanding of the content of the Constitution. And that is normal in a country like Mali where 50 plus people don't know how to read and write. And the transitional government has tried. They have translated all the document into most of the national languages. However, people voted for the president. People voted for the transition, for the support of the transition. Of course, there are major problems with the content itself. But at this point, the majority of Malians who have voted really voted in support of the president of the transitional government.
Right. But as for the Constitution and what the average Malian really thinks it wants, secularism is an issue of contention, very much so. How much power specifically the president has is another issue. And there's also this issue of taking the Constitution away from the French model that it has been based on for so many years. What are those issues to the Malian people in this vote and going forward into a new election, hopefully?
Well, I mean, Malians really want a clean disconnect from the French, which is a very difficult thing. This constitution is not by far very different from the current one we have. Of course, we have a lot of concern, even how we're going to finish up with this same referendum, because after the referendum is voted, after the Constitutional Court proclaimed this constitution, what will happen next still remains to be known. Are we going to be keeping with the same government, which is no longer constitutional right, because the current government is only legitimate through the charter of the transition. But once the constitution is proclaimed, then all of those become suspended or void, including the 1992 Constitution. So the question remains and the uncertainty remains, what is going to happen? Are we going to have a new government? Is the president going to take a new oath in conformity with what is included in the new Constitution? So it's clear that we have uncertainty as of how the rest of the process is going to play out. But what we do know is that this constitution was needed for several reasons. The military authority wanted to want to make sure that they have a safeguard, a security. If you read the Article 188, which is an amnesty for all the actions that may have happened before by this military group. So they wanted that safety. But also, Assimi Goïta, the colonel who's leading the transition now, does not have to step down to be a candidate. Before, according to the charter, even though he is not allowed to run, but if he had to run, he had to resign 4 months ahead of time. But with the
Okay.
new constitution, it doesn't have that obligation anymore.
Okay. I'll tell you.
If I may jump in there, if you may.
Yes, quickly, Issaka.
Okay, normally this constitution should not be for the transitional period. Experience in the region, Guinea 2009, 2010, Burkina Faso 2014, and several other countries. This constitution should not be for the transitional period. So, so the powers that are there should be the powers, the president should be the powers for the elected president. Therefore, unless they do a not so clear reading of it, the transitional authorities, current ones, should not benefit from this transition. So what the transitional charter says, that they should not be a candidate, and what their agreement and the instruments of the African Union and ECOWAS should apply, that the perpetrators of an unconstitutional change of government should not stand in elections aimed at putting an end to that unconstitutional change of government. Of course, now, if they do a different reading to go through the courts, that would be a different ball game. And then you would have now the dynamics within the military junta, whether Colonel Assimi Goïta has the necessary authorities over the other colonels, not just as a transitional president, but as an elected president with all these powers. I'm sure there would be some.
Okay, Issaka's connection now seems.
Some
What?
Ever
Okay.
be the intention.
No,
Yeah, what was making you laugh there? Go ahead.
Well, because there are what we wish and what is. There is a difference. As soon as the Constitution is proclaimed by the Constitutional Court, it starts in effect. So that is the norm anywhere. So we can say that this happened in this country or that country. In Mali, that we don't need the president to promulgate the Constitution. It is the voice of the people. If it passes, and which I'm sure is going to pass, then the Constitutional Court in the next 24 hours is going to proclaim it. And at that point, it falls into effect. And that, which means that anything that is contrary to this constitution is anti-constitutional. So if this constitution is in effect, then of course the government is no longer constitutional.
Okay.
Even the president's office is not constitutional.
Okay.
So we have to make sure that we meet the constitutional requirement for our institutions.
Fair enough. We're down to our last final minutes. So, Andrew, let me come to you because we really need to talk about, what's at stake, not just for the immediate region, but for the entire world in Mali's own stability. Not least countries like France that are watching very closely, but the United Nations, who's just had its mission taken out of the country for failure to deliver, as the Malian government put it. What's really in this for the international community? What's important?
Well, I think there are a couple of factors for the international community, some of them perhaps more pressing than others. In a general sense, there's, of course, a question of the overall legitimacy of so much international programming and really European American programming over the last 10 years in terms of efforts to fight militant groups, development assistance, and peacekeeping operations. More broadly, I do think that this has become such a broad regional problem that ongoing instability, but also a let's say difficulty to collaborate, except with certain partners in Mali's case, is also going to make this much more difficult. And as insecurity continues to get worse, not just in Mali, but in Burkina Faso and spread toward coastal West Africa, this is an ongoing risk for the region. And it's also certainly an ongoing risk for Malians. And the fact that the government has made really significant noise and have promoted their own successes, what they claim is their own successes in counterterrorism operations, that don't often match the reality on the ground. There's an ongoing risk to Malians themselves. Of course, this is a regional issue, this is an international issue, but this is also a Malian issue, and I think we shouldn't lose sight of that, and lose sight of the fact that there are so many Malians who suffer every day because of the ongoing security crisis and because of the difficulties in actually charting a new and more effective path, despite what the government claims.
Does seeing the UN mission taken out of Mali, does it leave an ominous feeling, not just for the UN, but for Malians themselves, or is this really something that just was unworkable from the beginning?
I think it can be a bit of both, and I'm not Malian. I'm not there, though I've spent a lot of time in Mali. But I can't speak for how the average Malian might feel about this. I do think there were very good reasons that people had to be critical and be skeptical of aspects of the mission. I also think that this is a political decision that does not necessarily reflect all of the kinds of failures on the part of the mission that the government has claimed.
Okay.
So it can be a bit of both, but I do think this will have potentially serious consequences, really, for the stability and even, dare I say, the sovereignty of Mali.
Andrew, that will have to be the final word. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists so much for being with us on this edition of The Newsmakers. Great to have you all. And to our viewers, of course, for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter. And do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.